At 37,000 feet, commercial cockpit instruments suddenly froze in mid-flight. Cal here. 42 minutes vanished from the flight recorder at high altitude. Same official story, same holes in it. 2 veteran airline pilots experienced a sudden atmospheric breach that defied radar logs. What breached the cockpit cabin that night was never logged in civil aviation reports. The flight records were seized within 2 hours of touchdown by military personnel. Captain Thomas Vance had accumulated over 18,000 flight hours without a single incident. Flight 482 was a scheduled overnight cargo transcontinental run from Seattle to Boston. Weather conditions along the flight corridor were calm, with unlimited visibility across all sectors. The Boeing widebody maintained steady cruise altitude of 37,000 feet. First Officer Marcus Reed was performing routine fuel balance checks in the right seat. All pre-flight safety inspections had passed, with 0 mechanical write-ups recorded. Air traffic control in Minneapolis maintained clear radar contact and normal radio traffic. The autopilot system engaged smoothly as the aircraft crossed into upper Midwest airspace. Both crew members had completed their mandatory pre-flight rest periods without issue. The twin turbofan engines maintained precise cruise power settings across the upper route. Subscribe to the channel if you track unassigned aviation anomalies and classified reports. At 2:34 a.m. local time, the cockpit primary frequency suffered sudden static. The primary radar scope flickered twice before displaying a solid metallic target signature. The secondary target matched the aircraft's speed perfectly without emitting transponder codes. Vance attempted contact with air traffic control, but the VHF radio produced only white noise. Within 30 seconds, the primary attitude indicator spun out of calibration completely. Auxiliary battery systems failed to engage, despite manual override procedures being executed. The magnetic compass in the cockpit glare shield rotated rapidly in continuous full circles. Cabin temperature dropped 12 degrees in under 20 seconds without pressure warnings. Digital flight deck displays flickered into high-frequency vertical distortion bars. The flight management computer initiated a total system reboot cycle unprompted by crew. Ground radar sweeps in Minneapolis lost the aircraft transponder signal at 2:35. Vance disconnected the autopilot to take direct manual control of the yoke handles. The control surfaces felt locked, offering heavy mechanical resistance against input. All backup flight instruments went dark simultaneously across both crew stations. The aircraft remained level, despite total failure of electrical generation systems. A dull metallic disc, roughly 40 feet in diameter, pulled alongside the starboard wingtip. The object emitted no visible exhaust heat or aerodynamic turbulence against the airframe. A high-frequency hum vibrated through the cockpit floorboards and control columns. Reed looked out the side window and observed a pulse of pale blue light around the disc edge. The illumination created no glare on the thick acrylic cockpit window glass surfaces. Leave a like on the video if you want more documented mid-air anomaly investigations. The disc matched every micro-adjustment of the cargo plane without aerodynamic tilt. Vance attempted to disengage hydraulic breakers, but his arm felt heavily weighed down. The ambient noise inside the cabin vanished into an absolute, suffocating silence. Airflow sounds around the nose cone ceased completely, despite maintaining high speed. The disc began to rotate slowly around its central axis without changing position. A concentrated electromagnetic field registered on the dormant navigational equipment. Vance noted that the aircraft fuel consumption meters had stopped calculating burn rates. The object maintained a precise distance of 15 yards from the wing structure. Both pilots realized the aircraft was no longer responding to atmospheric drag forces. A sudden wave of intense pressure compressed the air inside the closed cockpit deck. Vance tried to speak into his oxygen mask, but his vocal cords were completely unresponsive. First Officer Reed experienced immediate muscle paralysis from his shoulders down. A thin layer of frost formed instantly on the interior surfaces of the flight control panel. The air took on a distinct metallic odor, similar to high-voltage electrical discharge. Vance found himself unable to blink as his vision narrowed into extreme tunnel focus. The mechanical flight deck door latch clicked open without manual handle activation. A dense gray mist rolled through the door seam into the narrow flight deck corridor. The flight clock's second hand stopped advancing, hanging fixed between two markers. Vance attempted to trigger the emergency transponder code, but could not move his finger. The cabin pressure relief valves remained sealed despite extreme internal static charge. Reed attempted to signal Vance using eye movements, but his gaze remained locked forward. A low-frequency electromagnetic pulse passed through the airframe every 3 seconds. The sensation of forward momentum vanished completely, replaced by static weightlessness. The flight deck environment was totally isolated from external atmospheric physical laws. Two slender figures emerged from the gray mist, step by step, into the narrow cockpit space. Each entity stood roughly 4 feet tall, wearing smooth, seamless dark gray suits. Their oversized heads lacked external ears or pronounced nasal structures entirely. Large, slanting black eyes reflected the dim, amber emergency lighting of the flight panel. Vance experienced a sudden intrusive sensation of rapid thought projection in his mind. The entities moved with fluid, silent efficiency, ignoring the pilot seat restraints. Long, thin fingers ending in rounded tips hovered directly over Vance's flight console. Time dilation became severe. Seconds stretched into what felt like hours of observation. Reed remained completely immobilized in the right seat as an entity examined his controls. No verbal communication occurred. All instructions were conveyed through direct pressure. The entities showed zero reaction to the aircraft's manual flight warnings or alarms. Vance noted their skin had a smooth, matte texture, devoid of hair or moisture pores. A small metallic wand was passed over the main flight data recorder box in the ceiling bay. The cockpit environment felt completely pressurized under an unknown field boundary. Vance attempted to memorize their physical proportions, despite intense ocular strain. The secondary entity moved toward the main pilot seat to initiate physical inspection. Cold metallic instruments emerged from the shadow, hovering inches above the pilot's chest. Sensors attached to his temples emitted a low hum, registering involuntary neurological responses. Needle-like pricks penetrated the neck area near the carotid artery without causing immediate bleeding. The entities monitored physical reactions on a translucent handheld display projecting numerical data. A sharp thermal sensation spread down his spine as secondary scans probed deep tissue structures. His pulse dropped rapidly to 38 beats per minute while under complete paralysis. If this investigation matters to you, subscribe to the channel right now. The automatic pilot system maintained 37,000 feet altitude, while the cabin remained completely silent. A micro-incision was executed behind his right earlobe with surgical precision. A tiny metallic node, measuring 2 millimeters, was implanted beneath the dermal layer. The co-pilot remained unresponsive, his eyes fixed forward in a catatonic state. Pressure sensors along the flight deck walls recorded extreme electromagnetic spikes. The main entity recorded brainwave patterns onto a dark, crystalline storage unit. Spinal fluid samples were extracted through a non-invasive resonance field. The examination lasted 17 unrecorded minutes, while radar screens showed zero traffic. The entities stepped back in unison as the examination procedure reached completion. In a fraction of a second, the visitors dissolved into thin air. Instantly, motor control returned to the pilot's hands with intense muscle spasms. Master warning sirens blared across the cockpit, breaking the dead silence. The aircraft pitched down violently into an uncommanded 16-degree dive. Cabin pressure dropped rapidly, triggering emergency oxygen mask deployment. The pilot pulled back on the yoke with full physical force to arrest the fall. Press the like button right now if you see the holes in the official narrative. Airframe vibration rattled instruments as speed crossed 400 knots. The co-pilot gasped for air, breaking out of his paralysis state. Flight controls re-engaged at 22,000 feet, stabilizing the wings. Air traffic control audio cut back in with panicked calls from the sector controller. The pilot declared a Mayday emergency, requesting immediate landing clearance. Ground radar recorded the jet reappearing 4 miles off its original flight track. Subscribe to the channel right now to make sure these stories stay documented. The plane lined up on runway 09 with emergency vehicles waiting on tarmac. Tires touched down heavily as red sirens illuminated the dark runway. Instead of normal deboarding, military personnel intercepted the aircraft on the taxiway. Armed guards escorted both pilots directly from the jetway into black vans. They were transported to a secure wing of a nearby military medical facility. The captain was placed in isolated room 4 without access to phone communications. 2 federal agents presented non-disclosure agreements within 20 minutes of arrival. They demanded a step-by-step account while confiscating all personal belongings. The interrogation lasted 14 hours without breaks for sleep or rest. Agents repeatedly suggested the crew experienced severe, altitude-induced hallucinations. The pilot refused to sign statements, attributing the event to oxygen deprivation. He pointed to precise electrical system logs that contradicted hypoxia theories. The co-pilot was kept in a separate ward and forbidden from contacting him. Blood samples were drawn repeatedly at 3-hour intervals around the clock. If you also suspect officials silenced the crew, comment "quarantine" right now. Threats of flight license revocation were delivered if details reached news outlets. After 72 hours of isolation, he was released with mandatory medical leave. His official record was flagged under medical review status indefinitely. Subsequent private medical examinations revealed structural damage to his cervical spine. X-rays showed microfractures along vertebrae C3 and C4, consistent with extreme G-forces. A 3mm puncture scar behind his right ear showed 0 tissue inflammation. Magnetic resonance imaging detected a dense metallic object embedded in subdermal tissue. The object, composed of non-terrestrial isotopic ratio titanium-nickel alloy. The physician confirmed no surgical incisions were ever registered on his health record. Radiation detectors registered elevated gamma emissions near the scar site. Blood tests revealed abnormal white blood cell counts, lasting for several months. Severe insomnia and recurring night terrors plagued his daily recovery. Electroencephalogram tests captured unexplainable delta wave spikes during waking hours. Biopsy requests for implant extraction were rejected by military-affiliated hospital boards. Independent pathology labs confirmed the implant emitted low-frequency electromagnetic pulses. The co-pilot experienced identical spinal lesions and subdermal anomalies. Both crew members shared identical gaps in memory spanning the exact same time frame. Physicians admitted off the record that these injuries were non-human in origin. Federal investigators seized the cockpit voice recorder before airline mechanics arrived. 17 minutes of audio telemetry were erased from official archives. The official report concluded pilot disorientation caused an accidental dive. Radar data showing the hovering unidentified disc was classified top secret. Air traffic controllers were ordered under oath never to speak about the incident. Airline management forced the captain into early retirement with full payout. Maintenance records of electrical circuit burns were quietly overwritten. Freedom of information requests for telemetry logs were repeatedly denied. Military intelligence agents monitored his home telephone line for 5 years. The co-pilot relocated abroad and refused to answer inquiries about Flight 3700. An alternative narrative of severe weather turbulence was fed to aviation media. Independent researchers tracking radar anomalies were visited by federal officers. The original flight path charts disappeared from Civil Aviation Administration safes. Every physical trace of the encounter was systematically scrubbed from public view. If you watched until the end, comment "truth" so I know you saw everything. Subscribe to the channel, and here on my channel, there is another video about what the Greys did in the cockpit. Check it out. Decades later, Captain Miller finally refused to keep quiet about what happened on Flight 37,000. He produced his personal flight logbook, showing handwritten entries marked with severe magnetic spikes. Medical records from a civilian clinic revealed permanent structural changes to his cervical spine. Independent radiological scans confirmed tiny metallic fragments embedded deep beneath his skin. These microscopic objects exhibited zero magnetic polarization, defying standard terrestrial metallurgy. Subscribe to the channel for more unredacted accounts from commercial aviation veterans. Radar telemetry recovered from secondary civilian towers proved an anomalous object hovered at high velocity. The official report claimed oxygen deprivation, yet his co-pilot recalled identical details before being reassigned. If you know that official aviation reports often hide unexplained encounters, comment proof below. Radar files from that night remain locked, but physical scars don't disappear under administrative orders. Every instrument anomaly, missing minute, and bodily trauma points to a reality officials refuse to acknowledge. When trained commercial aviators risk their careers to share identical experiences, silence is no longer an answer. If you watched until the end, comment Sky, so I know you finished the whole breakdown. What do you think really happened inside that cockpit at 37,000 feet? And here on my channel, there is another video about what the Greys did in his cockpit mid-flight. Check it out.